trying to do something a little bit different today with my PowerPoint recordings. I'm actually trying to use the camera at the same time just to give it a little bit more personality. Maybe it'll make it a little bit more interesting so that you don't just listen to my voice the whole time. In reality, I prefer that over watching video. You're probably wondering why I'm wearing my sweater. It was raining this morning and I actually slept with the windows open and it was really cold. So anyhow, let's talk about chapter 6. We are talking about rhythm. When it comes to rhythm, we like to think about things like patterns. So what makes pattern different from rhythm? Rhythm is something that has a connection to sound or movement. And so we have this terminology here. We have this kinesthetic empathy. When a visual experience, an art piece, simulates one of our other senses, if you look at a piece of art and it resonates with memories and or associations, that is kinesthetic art. So anytime we look at a work of art and it stimulates our senses, we call it a type of kinesthetic experience. Okay, so let's take a look at this first example here by Charles Birchfield, the Insect Chorus, made in 1917. We are thinking about the overall composition. We are thinking about things like line quality, texture, space, and this overall design is actually very complicated. And if I were to ask you to point out any types of rhythm, what would some of these things be? And I see a lot of rhythm, especially with the line quality. I'm looking at some of these diagonals and these changes in movement. There's a lot of swirling and going back, and within these patterns and designs, there's changes of value. There's a little bit of blending, a little bit of dark to light happening within those spaces. And if you look at the upper left corner of the work, some interesting lines that look as though that object is moving down. We have this sense of shape being created there. Some really gestural shapes on the upper right corner. So there's a lot of examples of rhythm being portrayed here. And so what I mean by that, a lot of repetition in lines, and that the lines are also conveying a sense of movement. And so that is what we are looking for when it comes to defining rhythm. And so this is the definition of rhythm, a design principle that is based on repetition. Often rhythm is based on the repetition of elements that are the same or only slightly modified. Rhythm is a beat or flow of images that invoke a feeling of pattern or rhythm. We associate rhythm with hearing, but it can also be visual. And if we look at this example here by Bridget Riley, series 35, a very somewhat a muted color palette, but what we are really noticing is the fluctuation of lines, in that there's a repetition of the shape, but also a repetition of color, in that it is creating a movement just enough to distinguish a pattern, but because it feels like it's moving, then we can say it is a very rhythm-based work of art. So we also see rhythm in works of art that aren't always abstract. So if you look at this example here, Albert Ringer Potsch, Buchenwald in Herbst, Beech Forest in Autumn 1936. So we are looking at a photograph, and that the lines, the bending of the trees, and how We are going from dark to light. All of these qualities give us a sense of rhythm. We like to see rhythm when it comes to things like photography. We like to see a lot of these repetition of elements. And because it's not exactly the same element over and over again, it fluctuates just enough to create interest. So another example of rhythm in a photograph, Bruce Barnbaum, Dune Ridges at Sunrise, Death Valley, 1976. And so this photograph is of it looks like sand dunes, and we have these very flowy, organic shapes and lines and curves, and even within these strong contrasting areas, and within them we see even smaller lines and shapes. It's as though something combed into the sand. Something about rhythm, it feels like we're talking about music, and you'll hear a lot of parallels when it comes to talking about art and music. When the movement is connecting, we can describe it as a type of legato. Legato in music, it means flowing or connecting. From what I remember, legato is like walking. So it's moving from one step to another, but very continuous and not exactly rapid type of movement, but something a little bit slower, something more medium paced. And so in this example here, Charles Rennie Mackintosh, chair 1904. There is a very rigid rhythm going on here. We have these vertical lines creating these diagonals, very symmetrical design. Okay, so we can also find rhythm in pieces that aren't as organic or aren't as flowy as the previous examples, but it is definitely there. And again, what makes rhythm possible is this idea that it goes from one element to another, or it goes into one element to another of the similar element, but it slightly changes. So we also have these types of alternating rhythms. They are successful patterns in which the same elements reappear in a regular order. So it doesn't have to continually change. Instead, it can change, then it can go back and it can repeat itself. And that's what alternating rhythm is all about. It mentions here that this is an example of vibrating colors, colors that create a disturbance in the retina, creating a visual vibration for the viewer. Okay, wow, I never really thought about it like that. Edna Andrade, Interchange 1976, acrylic on canvas. So when we are looking at color and we see something emerge out of them, we are looking at these parallel lines, these diagonal lines, and among these, we are seeing these dots coming out of nowhere, causing a disturbance. A visual vibration is what they describe it. So that's very interesting. You'll see a lot of rhythm and pattern, especially in architecture. In this example here, brick cornice, decorative and ornamental brickwork. So if you were to look at a building and you were to look at some of the patterns and that they are happening over and over again, you'll see a lot of that in architecture. And even though it feels so mundane for us to look at architecture and to not exactly point out these patterns, we can ask ourselves, how are we able to see these lines? Really, it's the lighting and the environment, and that's one of the the beautiful things about looking at architecture, especially when, say, you are out and about, these shadows play a really big influence over how we are looking at everything. So we have this idea of progressive rhythm. It is converging patterns. So it's actually a different type of rhythm. Another type of rhythm where the repetition of a shape changes in a regular manner. And in this example here, artichoke halved, Edward Weston, 1930. It looks like an abstract photograph. And what the artist did here was basically get the vegetable and zoomed really close into the object so that we can notice some of these patterns. And in a way, he's trying to find these natural rhythmic patterns in natural objects, something that we often see in things like mechanical objects, but in nature, you see these types of patterns as well. It's as though it was man-made. So when it comes to this progressive rhythm, it can include things like color, it can include value, texture. It is a very familiar type of rhythm for us. So again, we are looking at these lines, these diagonal lines, and that they are slightly repeating over and over again. I'm guessing if you think about other things, other similar things, you can probably find the same type of progressive rhythm. Maybe if you think about pineapples, they too have, those outer textures, and that they slightly, they slightly curve out. Maybe if you think about palm trees. And so there's actually, you can actually see a lot of that in nature. If you think about the ocean, if you think about the water and the tidal waves, that feels like a type of progressive rhythm as well. You'll see the bubbles and how they begin to form, and then they dissipate, and they do the same thing over again.